These are African rhythms, passed down to us through ancient spirits. Feel the spirit, a unifying force. Come on, move with the spirit. Stand up, clap your hands. Groove with the rhythms, get down, get off.
Welcome to Africa World Now Project. I'm your host and producer, James Pope. Today, of Hesitance, W.E.B. Du Bois from Josh Myers of Black Study with Nathalie, Pierre. Africa World Now Project is next. Myers opens Of Black Study with an epigraph from June Jordan, who along with Barbara Christian, Addison Gale, Adrienne Rich, Audre Lorde, and Toni Cade Bambara were supporting students in a struggle around the Free University, an attempt to realize the dream of a black university at City College of New York. Jordan writes, Black Studies. The engineer, the chemist, the teacher, the lawyer, the architect, if he is black, he cannot honorably engage career except as black engineer, black architect. Of course, he must master the competence, the perspectives of physics, chemistry, economics, and so forth, but he cannot honorably or realistically forsake the origins of his possible person, or she cannot, nor can he escape the tyranny of ignorance except as he displaces ignorance with study of the impersonal, the amorality of the sciences anchored by black studies. The urgency of his heart, his breath, demands the knowing of the truth about himself, the truth of black experience. And so black students looking for the truth demand teachers least likely to lie, least likely to perpetrate the traditions of lying, lies that deface the father from the memory of the child. We request black teachers of black studies. It is not that we believe only black people can understand the black experience. It is rather that we acknowledge the difference between reality and criticism as the difference between the host and parasite. Myers, framed by this meditation from June Jordan, writes further in the introduction of Black Study that we are surrounded. We who are in the academy looking for a community like June Jordan and her students in 1969 are surrounded. We have also made it inside the gate, but we are now cornered. This place, the university, is the destination, they said. We were told that we had to be inside or else. And now that we are here, they lie to us, just as they lied to Jordan's students, just as they lied to the black professors they hired when they demanded teachers less likely to lie, just as they lied to the black teachers who went to college in order to teach those black professors long before 1969. They lied about us, about why we are here, how we got here, and what it means to be here. Although they would eventually again shut the gates, some of us made it through and have been here for a long time now, which means we have listened to these lies for a long time now. The lies have changed, but there are still lies. Every now and then, there's a slip, an exposure, a seam opens. We seize on those moments because the lie that sustains what Jordan called this system's exploitation of human life for material gain cannot exist forever. We say we believe. We enter a tradition of recognizing that this place and its knowledges are all a logical bundling of lies that mutilate and kill. That knowledge we call normative, objective, and therefore universal is not only or simply a fiction or construct. It is a mechanism of power, a force that imposes a particular kind of regime of truth on those who they lie about, who are said to have no knowledge to counter the lie. As we have queried the meaning of these lies, we have come up with many answers, even as there are deeper questions we know we should ask. But sometimes it feels like there are too few of us, left alone, left with questions unanswered. Some of us feel we have to participate in the lies in order to make do. The excuses mount. We turn our contempt inward. We call ourselves imposters. We rationalize other kinds of harms, perhaps believing in the end, the Academy's awards will suit us just fine. When we have been inside the gates for so long, there is a tendency to adjust. The continuities in these thoughts articulated in Of Black Study by Josh Myers are more prescient now than at any moment in world historical experience. These thoughts articulated on these pages echo the warnings that Du Bois gave in his speeches, mostly to HBCUs, collected together in a volume titled The Education of Black People, 10 Critiques, 1906-1960. Of particular note, and I strongly encourage current administrators, faculty, parents, students, and staff to study carefully and collectively Du Bois's Education and Work, 1930, The Field and Function of the Negro College, 1933, The Future of the Negro State University, 1941, The Future and Function of the Private Negro College, 1946, and Whither Now and Why, 1960. It is in these thoughts, further elaborated by Du Bois and others over the course of 11 decades, that we stand at the precipice of betraying the very essence of that most often quoted thought from Frantz Fanon. These meditations presented by Du Bois, the clarity in these thoughts are rooted in the material reality of Black folk, as he is closely paying attention to the conditions that must be addressed in order to move toward a different future. HBCUs and all of the attendant formations must understand the gravity of this moment, where fascism is reconstituting, sharpening its weaponry that have been and still is targeting Black life. It is a time to be brave, creative, and unapologetic in action. There's no mistake about this moment. No, quote, educational, unquote, training will ever, nor has it ever been enough to maintain collective freedom. Except, of course, when training is in preparation for direct confrontation of anti-human, racist, colonial, and imperial structures continuously. Now is not the time to engage in business as usual, adopting the practices of so-called educational frameworks that would undoubtedly jettison the very institutions, its administrators, faculty, staff, and students who are uncritically subscribing to their sanctity is a contradiction of the highest order. Education in the context of non-American, Euro, liberal, or progressive senses is not rooted in individual accomplishment or some fictitious abstract notion of Black genius. The necessity to ascribe Black in front of genius gives authority to those who have said and still say Black thought, Black intelligence is different than other geniuses or other forms of knowledge. When in fact, Black is the very essence of genius, the very essence of knowledge itself. There's nothing to unleash. Discover, remember, and assert, yes, but unleash, no. If we only had the courage to not lie. It is here Myers offers a path to remembering and asserting end of Black study, as he explores the ways that four Black intellectuals, W.E.B. Du Bois, Sylvia Wynter, Jacob Carruthers, and Cedric Robertson arrived at the critique of Western knowledge, and how in their own unique ways constituted and extended a tradition of intellectual work of Black study that went beyond the imperative to produce knowledge out of the framings and categorical logic of Western epistemologies. In their pursuit of a conceptual and epistemological freedom, they exposed the ways in which the knowledge foundations embraced in the university reflected the racial and colonial logic of modernity. And in doing so, these thinkers present not alternative modernities, but alternatives to modernity. Alternatives to the very conceptualization of what is considered to be or not to be human, as defined by imperial and colonial logic. Today, we present the first of 5 sessions where we unpack Myers' meditations on Black study, a line of thinking that is calling for us to think of ways to merge the material with the non-material, to call into question the very foundations of systems of thought that guide our everyday practices of being human in the rhythms of Blackness. What you will hear next is a critical exploration of Chapter 1 of Hesitance, W.E.B. Du Bois, with Nathalie, Pierre. Myers suggests for Du Bois was a desire to reveal the inadequacy of the prevailing norms of scientific inquiry, both on their own terms as well as their ability to reveal the truth of the Black experience. His work continued a process of thinking beyond discipline, beyond even interdisciplines, in order to access that truth. In that conception, Du Bois would have heirs who would take this further. His example was foundational to how they regarded the world. And just as Of Black Study grapples with Du Bois's legacies in ways that are different from those texts that seek to exalt him as the founding father of disciplines, it connects his confrontation with those disciplines to a genealogy of Black thinkers who extended his example in the early days of Black studies. Expanding and stretching this premise, you will hear a conversation we had with Nathalie Pierre. Nathalie Pierre is an assistant professor of history at Howard University. She has earned her PhD in history of the African diaspora in the Caribbean and Latin America from New York University. In the classroom and within her research agenda, Professor Pierre highlights the plans and processes people of African descent set in motion in order to sustain sites of autonomy across the Americas. She is currently writing her first book, The Vassal of Independence Must Save Itself, Haitian State Formation 1757 to 1815, which articulates the political thought of Haitian statesmen who were bound to preserve anti-slavery and create a government suitable for emancipated citizens of African origin in a revolutionary Atlantic world still reliant on enslaved labor. Her work has been published in the Journal of Haitian Studies, Cultural Dynamics, Remembrance, Loss, Hope, Recovery After the Earthquake in Haiti, and other forums. Previously, she was a postdoctoral fellow at the Graduate School of the City University of New York and the Institute for Research on the African Diaspora in the Americas and the Caribbean, a Black Studies dissertation fellow at the University of California, Santa Barbara, and Ronald E. McNair Scholar at Howard University. Public engagement is a critical part of her work, and after surviving the 2010 Haitian earthquake, she became a board chair of the Flamboyant Haitian Literacy Project, an immigrant education advocacy group serving migrant Haitian teens and their families. She has given lectures in Haitian, Creole, and English to community organizations, while also participating in the digital library of the Caribbean's online exhibit, Haiti, an Island Luminous. She is on the board of the Haitian Studies Association. Our show was produced today in solidarity with the Native, Indigenous, African, and Afro-descendant communities at Standing Rock, Venezuela, Corporation Jackson in Jackson, Mississippi, Brazil, the Avalon Village in Detroit, Colombia, Kenya, Palestine, South Africa, Ghana, Haiti, and other places who are fighting for the protection of our land for the benefit of all peoples. Listen intently, think critically, act accordingly. Enjoy the program. Thank you for taking the time to join us today for this important conversation on one of our colleagues and friends' book, Josh Myers, Of Black Study.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited.
No
Let's
problem.
do this.
So, real simple, how does Josh situate Du Bois in the overall thesis of what he's trying to do with this book?
I think one of the major tasks that Myers accomplishes is a reclamation of Du Bois. So one of the first things that he does on the of Hesitance Du Bois chapter is set up a modern context for Du Bois's reception in the academy. And all of these tributes, these posthumous awards, posthumous faculty member, which is one of these curious, non-tangible things that happens in the academy that is also a secondary point that Myers is making in this chapter. So he challenges the reclamation of Du Bois by the academy to then help us understand how Du Bois in his long trajectory is initially engaged in the promises of the discipline, but as he is also working outside the academy, he's seeing that the promises embedded in his disciplines are not sufficient to handle Black life. So Josh opens up with not a metaphor, but he gives us this concept of hesitation to help us resituate Du Bois in the academy. So there is this initial embrace of the disciplines, but again, as he becomes more of an activist, it's not possible to do that. But I just want to give us a few of Myers's definitions around hesitation, just so that we can see how Josh is helping us resituate Du Bois. So on page 15, this is early on in the chapter, he's writing, hesitation is a moment of both refusal and imagination. Hesitance is preparatory to a freedom from restriction. And finally, so the hesitation is also a break. He makes this beautiful allusion to music. I'm not familiar with the musician that he mentions, but in any case, in that example, he's putting hesitation in conversation with musical breaks. And he writes that, so let us now take a break, fully aware of the reality that the world we now inhabit is certain and has been certain of our negation. So this is what he's arguing Du Bois is struggling with in the academy. In the academy, Blackness is negation. And yet, in order to engage the academy at various stages of his career, Du Bois is opting to hesitate. It's a strategy that I think might be very compelling for Black scholars who are trying to do this Black study that Myers is outlining in the book.
So though the hesitation becomes very important because looking at Du Bois as he's hesitating in the knowledge that is being used to describe and engage Black life. And Du Bois is really kind of moving in this rhythmic movement work, talking to activists. His work as a teacher in the South, his work with international. So this hesitance become is a really interesting point of entry, but also departure that Josh is really trying to get us to think about Du Bois. And also, there seems to me in the question of being appointed a faculty member, the question probably would Du Bois even really wanted to do that. So that hesitance kind of like as that metaphor, but as that point of entry into us understanding Du Bois and his work. He's also looking at this and kind of critiquing. He's looking at scholars of obviously Saidiya Hartman, Naeem Chandler, Ronald Judy. He's using that particular article as well. Talk a little bit more about how he's expanding Du Bois. Like how is he helping us frame? So he frames it in this in this frame, right? As a musician, looking at Robert Glasper and my goodness, his co-conspirator, Robert Glasper's co-conspirator, Derek Hodge, who I actually listened to as well. But what is important about this too is that they are Black classical music or jazz artists as well, but in a new age. So Josh is making these interesting comparisons here and looking at Du Bois as being more futuristic in this hesitance, right? These questions that Du Bois is moving into and trying to understand Black life, this hesitance is causing him to be rhythmic. So he's looking at rhythm, but he's also looking at it in the context, for me, in the context of jazz as well. Do you see that?
I think that's a fascinating connection to be made. I am completely ignorant about US jazz in general. But what I like about Myers's use of music to help us reclaim Du Bois is to go back to this idea of the unreality of posthumously appointing someone on a faculty. So again, one of the major critiques in this book is these institutions are aligned with racial capitalism, and the disciplines that are formed are in many ways suited to perpetuate racial capitalism, right? So there's a necessity to remove Du Bois from this confining way of searching and studying Black life. So when he brings in jazz as a way to understand what Du Bois is doing, I think that might be a liberatory pathway for scholars who are trying to do Black study, because there's let me just take a moment to find this, because I like to anchor my commentary on the text. But yes, so But he's helping us understand, okay, so Du Bois is now claimed as a father of sociology. He is now claimed as a pioneer in the discipline of history, even though at the time when he was doing his work, it was not well received, right? Myers does this investigation of sociology, and on page 23, I think it gets to the heart of it. So he writes, where in his earlier, quote, the study of the Negro problems, end quote, Du Bois would characterize such an episteme as a kind of racist, quote unquote, faith, not grounded in careful study. So there are many fact collecting initiatives in the discipline of sociology that are based on racist faith. They are based on these intangible, non-material realities, and it becomes the cornerstone of the discipline. So if European American academia can base itself on racist faith, Myers is arguing that Du Bois in some ways offers up an inverse. So let's see. Okay, so sociology, other academic disciplines based on this racist faith, it's not really as empirical as they narrate the disciplines of being. So then what Du Bois is offering as an inverse is Du Bois's hesitance eventually broke with the quote unquote faith of sociologists and social reformers who maintained the fiction of the Negro's deviance. So Du Bois is able to do this because he is a innovator to this field. So when Myers is talking about the techniques that Du Bois used to actually write the Philadelphia Negro, he's adding strategies to study Black life that were previously not anywhere in the academy. So in the spirit of innovation, he's looking at the intangible, like the bad science of Western disciplines, and he's offering up something that is beyond the limits. And I don't remember which scholar Myers uses to help us think about what it means to go beyond the limits. But in any case,
Chandler, named
there,
Chandler.
there we go. There we go. Yeah, so let's see. And let me just continue with where I was just reading. Though scholars debate Du Bois's religious views, it is not clear that his belief in liberation was built upon a faith that did not require that the Negro be understood as the problem. So, in order to study Black life in the academy, that has to be the number one presupposition. And what Du Bois does in the early 20th century is he masters the techniques of studying the Negro as problem. And then once he sets up this fascinating research trajectory at the Atlanta School, this is where the deep innovations begin. And I think this is where scholars who want to do Black study, as opposed to finding Blacks in history, this is a template that we may want to follow.
So I'm thinking about the, kind of synthesizing, this notion of Black study, right? Josh mentions in this particular book, he talks about Black study means the tradition of refusal of the knowledge of the world as it was given to us by those committed to colonial and racial order, right? So this is the overall project, and using Du Bois, because this notion of looking at Du Bois is also Du Bois is this refusal, because I'm thinking about his response in The Souls of Black Folk when, there's someone, he says he met someone at a dinner at a party, and they asked him, what does it mean to be a problem? And Du Bois refuses to answer, right? So I'm thinking about this notion of Black study as the evolution, of course, in Black studies as being arrested by the forms of knowledge in the Euro-American Academy as we understand it today. And so Du Bois is really pushing or being anti-disciplinary. He doesn't fit into these the particularities of the academy. At the same time, the academy needs and uses what he learns, So there's this constant play, and he's keep pushing and pushing and pushing, these notions. This refusal becomes important. So I'm looking at this overall argument, looking at this chapter, what he's, this notion of a hesitance to accept this knowledge in the disciplinary, this disciplinary knowledge as being a way to find answers for Black life. So your response, or you could, anything in that you could take from that or add to that.
I think off top, just 2 points. One of the things that Myers is wrestling with in this chapter is many of the scholars who embrace empiricism, who embrace the boundaries of these disciplines, according to Du Bois, simply do not do good scholarship based on their own criteria, because this idea of a fact, the way that the idea of fact is constructed, there are implicit assumptions within fact collection that reanimate the negation of Black life. So I think that's one response to what you just said. Okay, so I'm on page 37. So this is where he's talking about the Academy's insistence on creating others. In my own field of Haitian studies, we have Michelle Rolfe-Tria, who calls it the savage slot. There is an Indian from India, Dipesh Chakrabarti, who says the other is always placed in the waiting room of history. So this is how racialized bodies are studied inside of academia, right? So on page 37, he writes, what was at the center of sociology's hesitance, and thus Du Bois's subsequent hesitance, is the ways that race structured what became law, and that engagement with the qualities of chance must be disavowed, for it might help explain and overcome the human motivations structuring the racism that grounded modern life. So race is an invisible ingredient in how these disciplines are being formed. And Du Bois's hesitation is, at some point, he is on board with this project. But again, as he begins to do more work within US Black communities, it's like, this is not going to come up with the answers, because the way that we frame the inquiry, the subject is already the problem. So I think for Du Bois, having been as highly trained as he was when he started hesitating within these different disciplines, is he's able to make critiques that become innovative praxis. And I'm excited about this chapter in particular, because how can we create that praxis now? Because I think we have more hands on deck in terms of Black academics. I think there might be a lot of misguidedness on how to study Black life. And this offers up Du Bois's strategy as a good template to try to follow.
I agree with you wholeheartedly, and it's also, as he kind of gets to the end of the chapter, it's this notion of the questions that open for Du Bois, because he talks about Du Bois towards the end, this sense of not necessarily, being incomplete, but not necessarily finished, like, this idea that there's more to do. You mentioned your own work, and I think it's a good point where we can really kind of integrate your work. How do you see this chapter, or these meditations of Du Bois and hesitance and Black study? How do you see it informing what you do, your work? How you thinking about or going about, engaging in your praxis?
Oh, absolutely. So one of the arguments that Myers makes about Du Bois's reclamation in the Academy is that in order for him to be reclaimed, his revolutionary praxis had to be defanged, right? So that immediately just helps me question the modern tendency to want to reclaim the Haitian Revolution as part of Atlantic world enlightenment. I understand the impulse. If you are a Black scholar in the academy, one of the ways that you gain purchase is by getting validation from the academy for the subject of your research. However, claiming the revolution as part of an Atlantic world enlightenment or an Atlantic world humanism, it defangs some of the revolutionary potential of understanding what the Africans who became Haitians in that period were trying to do. It doesn't, in my work, it doesn't mean that that work is not necessarily relevant. It just helps me understand that, okay, if Du Bois can be reclaimed despite how he was vilified in his moment, there's a direct parallel to the Haitian Revolution and how it was rejected in its time. And in the past 2 decades, there's been this earnest reclamation of it in the academy. So that's something really easy off top. Another way that I can see of Black study working is in my curriculum. So there are parts of it. So I already mentioned I would put some of this chapter in conversation with Trio's Savage Slot concept. I would put it in conversation with because my work is about nation state formation, right? And in the same way that the Negro is constructed as a problem in the academy, Negro states are Negro states or racialized states are automatically already seen as a problem to the way that other white nation states emerge. So just having this insight on how Du Bois has been reclaimed, how that means that some of the revolutionary potential of his work gets cast aside, that helps me engage the scholarship that's coming out in my field in a more critical way. And it just gives me a clarity on how my work is different from the work that is trying to reclaim the Haitian Revolution.
And this notion that the idea of, mapping the Haitian Revolution as being the Enlightenment, right? This as being directly informed, as opposed to looking deeper to understand that, you know, those those Africans who become Haitian, right, had knowledge systems, right? And so looking at that and looking at the way that Du Bois looks at or kind of expands this notion of study, I'm looking at that relationship between you kind of going back and looking at, say, like C.L.R. James. How can you look at, or are there ways that you can look at Black Jacobins, right, and see if there's something that was missing or something that was on point in the context of Hesitance?
Okay. I think reading Black Jacobins against Myers's proposition of Black study, James is practicing this strategy. You're using the history of one group of Africans in the diaspora as a way to foreshadow independence possibilities in other areas of the African diaspora. So as we know, when James initially wrote the text, it was with an eye to the oncoming African decolonization. So he's looking at this one historical example of Black people creating autonomous space for themselves within the confines of white hegemonic, Atlantic world. And he's projecting what were, in some ways, what were some best practices? You need the people to be an engine that bring out your leaders, that open up an alternative way of being. So this is the idea behind Toussaint Louverture's name, right? But I want to bring it, I want to make a connection between the freedom struggles of the Haitian Revolution and the freedom struggles of US Africans in the time period that in the time period that Du Bois is making these realizations about the academy, right? So page 46. Yet Du Bois's poetic invocation of the past showed us that Black folk exhibited a sense of freedom that was more profound than whatever had passed for American democracy. And I'm skipping down a little bit because he gives us a bunch of examples. And when it failed, they continued to practice forms of self-determination that sought to ensure their own safety. So, Black folks, okay, you're coming up with this concept of democracy. We're gonna engage it. We're gonna do the ballot. We're gonna do the trade schools. We're going to engage all of the tools that the societies that we're in. We're going to engage it, but the way that we're engaging it is not identical to the ways that state agents are prescribing it. So the self-determination practices of US Africans in the post-Reconstruction South, it's not this democracy, this mainstream white democracy. Similarly to Haiti, liberté, équalité, fraternité, on paper, yes, but it's not exactly the same. And when we're looking at autonomous Black spaces, translation is really important, right? So we see this in the synchronization of African-based spiritual practices in the Americas, right? The ways that Lois and Orishas travel across the water and then they get synchronized into Catholicism or other Christian denominations. On paper, it's one thing, but in practice, it's something very different. And when you get even more localized, one sect of Haitian Voodooism, on paper, we are all followers of Ogu, right? Which is I think the Yoruba counterpart would be Shango, right? But if you go into distinct villages, distinct communities, oh, that's how you guys do Ogu? Oh, that's interesting. So if there is that much diversity of self-determination practice in spiritual communities, right? Imagine the diversity of it in post-emancipation societies across the Americas. So we're not all striving for this European democracy. If democracy gives us a little wedge for us to create our own understandings of things, yeah, okay, we're going to embrace this democracy. We're going to embrace this age of revolutions. And I think that's where I'm excited about. How do we get past the superficial labels that people of African descent have used to create space of autonomy for themselves? I think for me, that's the real Black study.
Oh, eloquently put. I mean, exactly what I was just thinking about. You know, that cracking open allows one to really, you know, Thomas Sankara talks about this notion of inventing the future. I'm thinking about James Boggs talking about Negroes in the United States think we're struggling for democracy when in actually we're struggling against it. So I'm really thinking about like, you know, how this opens up a space and how Black studies opens up a space for us to really pull together those particularities into this, you know, a universal, so to speak, or some type of understanding that there is a future that can be created out of the ashes of the mess that we find ourselves, right? So, you know, very well put. I mean, and of course, I'm thinking about maroonage, I'm thinking about space, I'm thinking about how Haiti itself, you know, we tend to, in the academy and outside of the academy, those who are engaged in study and organizing, they reference Haiti, but I'm not really sure if there's a real engagement with Haiti in its totality, right? It's Haiti in its parts as being, you know, in its totality, right? So
No, yeah, absolutely. The symbol The symbolic import is more valuable than the messy reality. And I think this is part of what Myers is saying about Du Bois. The way that facts were being collected about Black life, it would always be insufficient. And I think this idea of hesitation, this is where it can animate your imagination, particularly around things that are not retrievable through empirical fact. Because the reality is, to study certain periods of Black life, you don't have that empiricism, but you have culture, you have music, you have aesthetics, you have and those things are not palatable in an academy that requires for Blackness to be a problem. Because if you are studying how Black people create, what's problematic about that? Where's the value in that? So I'm excited to see how we can do this within the academy space. I've discussed this with Dr. Myers many, many times across many, many years. I don't think that's possible in the academy. But I was really excited about the parts on the Atlanta school, right? So where is this? Because I think a contemporary, so on page 30, he talks about this 100-year cycle of research. That I want to do that. And I know that the Institute of the Black World is an amazing example that we can use as a template to practice this hesitation, because there's one part. Myers is analyzing a letter that Du Bois is writing to Herbert Aptheker. They're talking about hyperbola, and I actually had to go look this up. This is something that we probably learned in calculus at some point, but there's this idea of a line that goes into the infinite, but it never connects with anything. And Myers is arguing that this is the type of thought process that Du Bois was encouraging. So you continue to think about Black life without this Western academic orientation, that capital T truth is going to come out of that inquiry. Because if capital T truth is always the intended end result, you're going to miss a lot about Black life, because they're not reducible into the types of categories that are legible in the academy, well, in the current academy.
Yeah. Oh, and it's very interesting because I definitely, it's funny that you say, you've had conversations with Josh, and, same thing with me. I'm not convinced. And more so now, I'm not convinced that the academy will be that space. So then the reference to the Institute of the Black World, particularly its first iteration, I'm with you. I'm definitely in that particular vein. How do we create those mechanisms? Because again, does that mean that we leave the academy? Maybe not. Some do, some don't. But I think that there has to be concerted and intentional efforts to make sure that we are in communication across those boundaries. Because when we think about disciplinary boundaries within the academy, we also have to be clear about the fact that Du Bois was deconstructing those boundaries between community as well. So that becomes essential and important to kind of talk about.
I just want to hop in, like when you were saying inside and outside the academy. So Myers mentions both Du Bois's embrace and critique of economic cooperatives. Earlier this week, I was watching an interview with Kali Akuno, who runs Cooperation Jackson in Mississippi. It's not the economic cooperative on its own. It's not about creating a structure where we can do good at capitalism through economic cooperatives. This money that is generated in the co-op is and should be funneled toward the political objective. So as I was listening to Kali speak on economic cooperatives, and I'm thinking about the critiques of economic cooperatives that made, the left in the US, kind of abandon Du Bois in some ways. I think there's something to be said about adopting an economic cooperative model, but based on intellectual labor and organizing, right? So we're doing this intellectual labor in service of funneling it toward some pre agreed upon political outcome. How does it look? I don't know, but this is why I'm excited about this 100 years of research, Institute of the Black World, previous iteration, because it's by practicing with these tools, economic cooperative, that maybe we can think through no thinking through praxis, and then we get beyond the limit of the academic versus organizer binary. Yeah, so yeah, I'm excited about that. Like, how do we take up the things that were obviously radical in Du Bois's thinking and repurpose them for what it is that we're trying to accomplish? What is it we're trying to accomplish is a good first order question. But I think the way that Myers maps it out chapter by chapter, I think it's a useful corralling of, I don't want to use corralling because that's too close to disciplining, but
Gathering,
um
gathering.
gathering, right. Isn't his publication called The Gathering Place?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. And it's interesting. It's there's a way that you know a person in real life, and that's like one set of intimacy. And then there's a way when you read the person work, it's another layer of intimacy. So just now, just like, right, that is the title of his publication, a gathering.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
Fascinating.
Yeah, no, I'm with you, and and I saw that that interview as well, and you
Can
know,
we talk about that?
yeah, well, the cooperative. So we've done some work on Africa Bold Now Project to kind of think through, this notion of the cooperative, and this is, and I want just really quick, I think what I think about the way that cooperatives in one particular sense, particularly in the sense as a dominant narrative, is limiting because I think about cooperatives in the tradition of maroonage,
Mm,
which is something outside of just the financial exchange of value based upon some goods and services. It was a more communal, more, you know, I would be very interested. I guess where I'm at, I'm just because I don't know if we should go really far into that conversation. Maybe we could think about this in another iteration.
mhm,
But
mhm.
but I think about cooperatives as defined by maroonage. What
Okay.
does that look like? So the conversation to me, while I do understand that it is still a reaction to racial capitalism to develop some type of collective force. But again, as the boys saw, that's not enough. And we all
Mhm.
see that. So African people see that. We see that it's not just that financial exchange of value, that's or the consolidation of financial spending or value. It's something more and beyond. Um, and so that's for me. So when I think about cooperatives, for me, I just can't, for some reason, in my mind, separate it from that maroon space. Like, what was maroonage?
So, and I might get some flack for this, but part of the autonomy that Maroons had relied on the suppression of Africans still on the plantation, right? So when we're looking at Maroons in Jamaica, when we're looking at Maroons in Suriname, part of that autonomy, okay, but no new Maroons can come to this space. So that's one. I think there's a healthy tension in thinking about cooperatives in the sense of Maroons, but there's also this backdrop of we're still engaged in this racist capitalist system in some way in order to have our cooperative, right? That's one point. But another point, and I just want to put this out there, why are US Africans labeled fugitive slaves and not Maroons? I'm just, I'm just curious about that, and I just want to like put it there because maybe this is something we can talk about in the larger bit. But I think that one baby step is a consolidation of language so that we, as people who are privileged to narrate the histories of our people, um, I think there's something gangster in being a maroon as opposed to a runaway slave. Just the way you describe it, I think, especially if we're trying to take it outside of the academy into our communities, I think I think there's something to be said in teaching Harriet Tubman in conversation with Nanny of the Maroons of Jamaica, because how can we look at their unique set of life experiences and put them in conversation to see the types of strategies that they engaged in against their various states? And I'm not trying to collapse it. I know that these women are living completely different empires, different slavery systems, et cetera. But there's still the capital I imperialism as their as their main quote unquote enemy, right? Is there something that we can is there something that we can learn from the experience of Tubman going back to her, going back for her husband and finding out that he's remarried? There's one discourse around that, like, oh, yeah, he just abandoned her. Okay, that's one interpretation. But for me, of Black study would mean like we need to complicate that narrative, because what does that offer up to 21st century? I'm reading a really weird book right now, African American mating practices. So I'm just, because I don't want to put like marriage, bourgeois institution, romantic love, similar bourgeois, concept. Mating is quite base, but again, I'm reading a really weird book. But my fundamental point is, how do we look at those examples, contextualize them, and get the nuggets that can be the seeds of our own liberation? Yeah.
Something that you just said very interesting is that you use the concept main enemy. I think that has a lot to do with the fact that there really isn't a clarity in the concepts that we're trying to use to develop our political movements. Most people are not sure what their enemy is. So for one to use Black capitalism and to use the enemy is capitalism and its attendant, categories, right? So I think that, I think there's something there, yeah, no, this is very interesting, and I don't want to hold you too long because I also want to keep a little bit in the bottle for when we all get together as well.
Okay.
So what I wanted to do is, as we kind of close the conversation, on page 50, Josh kind of quotes Du Bois or uses and says, "For Du Bois, the solution was not a matter of law; it was a matter of the human heart." Then he goes on, and so with that being said, I wanted to know how did you feel after reading this chapter, or yeah, just this chapter for now? What did it make you feel?
Um,
Are you still feeling?
no. Caribbean background, air horn. That's how I felt. Because it's um, yeah, the Philadelphia Negro is one of these texts that really inspired me to become a scholar. So when I saw Josh citing the cold-blooded scientific inquiry, I was just like air horn. Um, but I also like I also really appreciate the deliberate block quotes that Myers uses. Um, you're a fellow academic, you know that they discourage us from using these block quotes, but there's an acerbic humor to Du Bois's work. And some of that is captured, and I just want to give one example if I can just find it because it was hilarious. So on page 24, it's a block quote from Du Bois, and it says uh, he's pretty much criticizing the disciplines creation of law based on fuzzy facts, right? You're making something into a standard operating procedure, but it's not. It doesn't have the firm basis in which that the academy is saying. And Du Bois is reflecting, and somewhere in this block quote, he says, now, in the face of this, to propose calmly the launching of a science which would discover and formulate the exact laws of human action and parallel, quote, heat as a mode of motion with a mathematical formula of, quote, Shakespeare as pure energy or Edison as electrical force. That Shakespeare as pure energy, like I just saw our Gen Z students, like it's just vibes, man. So this is Du Bois critiquing some of the standard, it's just vibes, man. I'm like, what? So it's like when you read it, you're like, this is absurdly funny. And yet this is how the disciplines move forward. Yeah, so I felt tickled. I felt air horn. I'm not sure if air horn is a feeling, but and I felt immensely proud of Myers's contribution, because though he is encouraging us to escape disciplinarity, he is practicing it he's practicing it to the high level that Du Bois emulates as a way to demonstrate I am qualified to critique this, to complete shards.
Yeah. I actually thought about something else is because, of course, this is a Black study. We all teach at you, me, and Josh teach at HBCUs. So the critique becomes for me and I, of course, graduating from Howard, going to Howard, teaching at Howard, and then also teaching at another HBCU. The critique for me is like that Du Bois, because Du Bois is a chief shade thrower. He is definitely, he cuts you up and you're like, you walk away and you're like, oh my goodness, I'm bleeding. Like, did he just, and having had the pleasure to actually know and be in conversation with people who actually knew him, like Esther Cooper Jackson, hearing those stories, becomes very, very interesting. And even more just the way that, he was outside of the space that we read, or outside the intellectual space, which is interesting because most of them say he carried that over to his regular life as well. Very disciplined, very, 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 very clear, those type of things. So with that being said, I just want to, if you have any more comments, but, this notion that I'm definitely want us to think about this in the collective, is this idea of how does this look in the context of HBCUs, of Black study, what Josh is doing here, but we'll do that later,
Okay.
Together. Any closing comments that you have? Because this has been generative.
Let's see. No, because I think some of this will come up with our larger, yeah.
Well, no, listen, this was wonderful. This was great. I'm glad we were able to have the conversation. And I can't wait to have you back to talk about some of the work and some of the things that you're doing on yourself.
Absolutely. No, thank you for having me.
Yeah, I rep the few that could sell you their life story in 2 acts. From New Jack to he who would find glory and knew that I started in the.
That's it for Africa Vote Now Project for this week. I would like to thank you for joining us today and look forward to spending time with you next week. Follow us on Twitter at AFWRLDNWPRJ. Instagram at Africa World Now Project. Access to our other media platforms can be reached through the bios of our social media. I'm your host and producer, James Pope. The Africa World Now Project Collective consists of international media journalist, executive executive producer and human rights activist Bois Nathalie, Africa World Net Project media correspondent Mona Ngonda, senior research, content contributor, and production director Dr. Tasneem Siddiqui, senior research, content contributor, and production associate Dr. Josh Meyer, associate producer and content contributor Dr. Keisha Khan Perry, content contributor and filmmaker Kurt Watterson, technology advisor is Byron Gray of Grayworks Technology, and creative directors, international creative and artist designer Tabassum Siddiqui and Judah Pope. Programs are archived and available on all podcast platforms. Search Africa World Mail Project. Until next week, be safe, be peaceful, and above all, be intelligent.
And just swear you going with them, not just to visit, cause they're in a mental prison. Existing isn't living. I pray that you know the difference. If you trying to go the distance, liberate your mind. Your soul gon' follow, it ain't far behind. As long as you're not hollow, it ain't hard to find. I personally transcend space all the time. Shine like
silhouettes when they dancing in the limelight. In hindsight, your songs is nursery rhymes like three blind mice. You were Klondike looking brown, but take a bite, you probably find white. You want the real, so I'll provide you with the highlights. You'll never be prepared for what we facing if you scared of confrontation. They'll never hear what you're saying if you bring fear to the conversation. These abominations, abomination, and murder entire populations. Put them in camp, say it's meant to enhance their focus and concentration. I'm saying, when people tell you who they are, you should believe them. It's heartless how they treat them, and it's garbage that they eat in regardless of what they feed them. They still starving for their freedom, like they ravaged. These devils be terrified of God for a reason. You could be savage as a heathen, but ain't no atheist in foxholes. It's up your alignment like a New York City pothole. Since it's not knows, the son was a dreamer like he Avato. Running with mums, the schemer as he chronicled the cockroach when it got most. Created a classic, that's how they got close. Open for the rooster, kept the bar closed. Some was nice with the bars though. Just the crack that we trafficking like we narcos. Got us all the way up like my stock go when I pop off like the firearm the queen kept in the purse like the hot sauce. Tell my accountant hit the broker with a stop loss, cause I got cost to consider. Don't be bitter cause you was listening to knockoffs. Get your ass about the throne cause it is not yours and you know it. Evacuated with Black Thought and Black Star created. Belong to 215 Entertainment and Black Star Incorporated, cause we ain't playing. We defied and melt your plastic operation. The ancestors proud of us cause we the catalyst for mass decarceration.
Bismillah, reversing the misfortune by moving forward. Every direction is determined by intention. Life is a school for all of us without exception. 24/7 seminars are in session, Some serious studious, some class clowns. Then reality like gravity shut that ass down. They laugh now then cry later and longer, They told me ain't nothing wrong without some water. Look, we sacrificed for what we needed to want it. If it was righteous, exact, or was out of order. Everything is not for sale. Everybody pay a price. You can run away and not escape. That's the way of life. Nobody makes it out alive. Wow. Nobody ever really dies. Ain't it crazy how the contrasts coincide? Ain't it strange how I'm amazed, but I'm not surprised. They say that they don't understand it, but it's not a lie. And indeed their understanding is not required. Cause as long as the soul responds and you feel a vibe, don't trouble your mind, it's quite alright. More will be revealed in time. Thanks for being with us. Ciao for now. Higher frequency champion sound. Yes, yes, y'all. Feel free, indeed. Fly like a dove, way up above. Rockin', love. Waves all over the place. Waves all over the place. Waves all over the place. Waves all over the place.